The carrot yielded to my knife so easily and obediently, as if life itself were guiding my hand, and in this gentle resistance I suddenly caught that same habitual submission I developed over 37 years of marriage, when I learned not to argue, not to resist, but to accept everything as it was, because otherwise the fragile world I lived in would crumble. It's 6 in the morning, and I've been up for 3 hours already, busy preparing for the feast in honor of Raphael's anniversary, and every minute of sleep stolen from me by this kitchen sent a lingering pain through my temples. But I continued to move, as if wound up. 15 years of marriage to a woman who never once called me by name, addressing me exclusively as Raphael's mother, always with a tone in her voice that made me sound like I was an extra, an inconvenience, an accidental relative, abusing someone else's hospitality, even though this was my son's home, my family, my blood. Thick steam rose from the enormous cauldron where beef bones had been simmering since midnight, and in this fog, the kitchen reminded me of the restaurant I once dreamed of opening but never got around to, because back then, all my time was spent on my family, my husband, Raphael, and my dreams were put off, first for tomorrow, then for later, and then they turned into a duty and an obligation. The sense of rosemary and thyme hung in the air, so warm, so noble, and I suddenly felt as if these scents had become my only companions. My back ached from bending over the cutting boards, my arms ached with fatigue, yet I continued to work. After Fonz's death 2 years ago, I had no other language but cooking, and every dish became my way of saying, "I love you," even if those I cooked for seemed to have forgotten my existence and remembered me only when they needed something. The guest list grew from 15 to 43, and each new invitation arrived as a short message from Albina, my sister-in-law, in the same dry, casual tone as if she were ordering groceries. "Add 3 more. Our friends are coming." A few more of Raphael's colleagues. And then there were Albina's friends and his old college buddies. Not a word of, "Do you mind?" Not a shadow of a doubt, just the assumption that I could handle it, that I was an inexhaustible storehouse of maternal care and sacrifice. I counted it down to the last penny, $867. That's how much it cost for the ingredients. My Social Security barely covered that amount, but I still pulled the money out of my savings, from that small stash I'd carefully saved for a modest apartment on the other side of town, overlooking a park, where I could sit on my own veranda, breathe freely and not feel like a guest in my own son's house. But the money was gone, and I didn't even regret it. By 6:30 in the morning, I had already popped the lamb shoulder into the oven, and by 7 in the evening, I served the stuffed portobello mushrooms. By 8, everything had cooled. Me, the 3 desserts I'd prepared, and my hands mechanically whipping cream for the asparagus because it was in my muscle memory, ingrained over years of cooking for Fonz's business dinners, for Raphael's graduation, for every occasion that mattered to everyone but me. "Good morning, Mom," I heard behind me. Raphael entered the kitchen in his pajamas, his hair still hanging to one side, like a boy just out of bed. Despite being 42, there remained something childish in his sleepy gaze, something that had once squeezed my heart with tenderness. Now, that gaze only tired me. "The coffee's ready," I said, not taking my eyes off the sauce. He poured himself a mug, leaned against the counter, and surveyed my controlled chaos. "It smells amazing in here. You haven't slept since midnight, have you? Why torture yourself like this, Mom?" Albina ordered a few more appetizers from downtown. I froze. "She what?" "Just a few extras. Cheese, crackers, and stuff like that for variety." I felt my heart clench, as if a thin thread had snapped. Everything I'd cooked turned out to be just background filler, unnecessary noise next to the real food. My energy crumbled like yolks, spreading across the table in sticky puddles of disappointment. "I'm cooking for 43 people, Raphael," I breathed out. I know, and it's amazing. But Albina just wanted to make sure there was enough. She's stressed, you know. She knows how to throw a party." "She knows how?" I screamed silently. Had Albina ever cooked for more than 4? Does she know what it's like planning a menu for 43 people and stretching a meager budget, squeezing every last dollar? I've been doing this longer than Albina has been alive. The words burst from my lips harsher than I'd intended, but I couldn't hold them back. He looked at me as if he'd forgotten I had a right to my own opinion. Okay, Mom, whatever you think is best. These words didn't sound like agreement, but rather an empty gesture, the same one Albina knew how to use to cut off a conversation, leaving me with the feeling that my voice was of no use to anyone. After he left, I was left alone in the kitchen, the heart of the home, which in just a few minutes would be filled with strangers' voices, laughter, and glasses, all of whom would eat my food, savor its flavor, and, without a second thought, praise Albina for how wonderfully everything had been arranged. The smell of roasting lamb filled the air with a rich, rich aroma of rosemary and garlic, and in that smell, it seemed, my entire life, all my invisible work, everything I had given to people over the decades, were intertwined. I had been cooking since I was 12, since the very day my mother passed away, and the responsibility fell upon me to feed my father and brothers. And perhaps it was then that I first understood that food is the language of love, a language few can read. Now I'm 65, and I'm still feeding everyone but myself, and there was something bitterly ironic about it, as if my life had come full circle and I'd never quite recovered. The morning dissolved into a haze of final preparations. Twice-baked potatoes sizzled in the second oven, chocolate mousse carefully placed in bowls and left to cool in the refrigerator, and everything around me seemed enveloped in a thin haze of fatigue and endless chores. I changed into a purple dress, the very one Albina had recommended, assuring me it wouldn't show stains if I had to serve the food myself. I tied my hair back with the silver barrette Fons had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary, and when I touched it with my fingers, I seemed to feel his hand, so distant and yet so close, like the memory that love had once truly lived within these walls. People began arriving at 4 o'clock. I probably only recognized half of them. A couple of Raphael's friends from work, Albina's sister and her husband, a few neighbors. The rest were complete strangers, eating my food and never knowing my name, as if the food I cooked had no author. From the kitchen, I saw Albina gliding through the living room in her red dress, light and smiling, surrounded by compliments about what a wonderful party it was, how beautifully the house was decorated, and how divine the food was. "The lamb is simply delicious," I heard someone say to her as they filled their plate, and Albina replied, "Thank you so much. We really wanted to. Make this dinner special." And she said it as if she had been standing by the oven since midnight, as if her hands had been kneading the dough and chopping the vegetables. I carried the fresh dish into the dining room and set it next to the untouched store-bought cheese and crackers. And at that moment, Raphael's gaze met mine. He smiled, that same sunny smile that once meant everything to me, that warmed me more than words, but now seemed like nothing more than a tip for good service. The day dragged on at its own pace, alien and cold. I filled plates, washed dishes, cleaned up after people, while all around me was a party, laughter, and ease. Every compliment, every thank you for the food was addressed to Albina, every admiration to Raphael, and I felt myself becoming invisible in my own kitchen, a ghost guarding my own recipes. At 6:30, as I was plating out the last portion of lamb, I heard Raphael's voice from the dining room, loud, drenched in wine, and the euphoria of the holiday. "Well, if no one wants more, we'll just feed it to the dogs." Laughter rang out, the light, good-natured, wine-fueled laughter of people with full bellies, and above it, Albina's laughter rang out, musical, carefree, confident. "Feed it to the dogs." The words echoed in my head like bullets ricocheting, each impact bringing back a memory. 24 hours of work, $867 spent on food, beef bones simmering since midnight, hollandaise sauce whipped by hand until my arms ached. For the dogs. The spoon clattered to the floor. My hands instinctively reached for the aluminum pots in which I'd brought the food. Usually they waited in the corner, ready to return home empty, just as I returned. Empty. But not today. I began transferring the food back into the pots. First the lamb, then the vegetables, the stuffed mushrooms, the potatoes. My movements were calm, confident, as if I were following an old, familiar recipe. "Mom?" Raphael appeared in the doorway, perhaps for another bottle of wine or clean glasses. "What are you doing?" I didn't look at him. I transferred the chocolate mousse to a container and put the buns in a bag. Everything was heading home. "What? Why?" He stepped closer. "You said you could feed all this to the dogs." My voice was even. "I don't want to deprive the guests of their fun." He blushed. "Mom, it was a joke. The people are full." But I could already hear the dessert plates being sent to the container, everything I'd prepared and paid for being returned to me. "Mom, please don't be ridiculous." That was just ridiculous. I finally looked at him. At this man, my son, whom I'd raised, loved, for whom I'd given up myself, and who now considered my grievances absurd. "You're right," I said quietly. It was ridiculous of me to think my cooking was so important it wouldn't become dog food. Silence fell over the kitchen, and through the doorway I saw people turn around, sensing the change in the air. The festive atmosphere had grown thick and tense. Albina appeared next to Raphael, her red dress glowing like a sign of danger. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice betraying that note of irritation that always appeared when I wasn't playing my assigned role. "Nothing," Raphael quickly replied. "Mom, I'm leaving," I said, picking up the last container, heavy and satisfying, like proof that I still had something of my own. "Enjoy the party." I walked past them both, past the dining room full of surprised faces, past the living room, where someone quickly turned up the music to hide their awkwardness. No one stopped me. No one followed me to the car. As I loaded the food into the trunk of my old Honda, I saw them through the window. Raphael and Albina were discussing something, gesturing tensely, probably trying to salvage the evening without the woman who had made it happen. My phone vibrated as I pulled out of the driveway. Message from Raphael. "Mom, come back. We can talk about this." I deleted the message without replying and drove home to the empty house where I would eat my meal alone, the same way I'd eaten everything else for the past 2 years. And as soon as I pulled out of the driveway, my phone vibrated again. Gaston's name appeared on the screen, my nephew, my sister's son, who had somehow inherited our family's stubbornness and my dangerous relationship with food. I pulled to the side of the road, my hands still shaking with adrenaline and rage, when his voice came through my hearing aid, shaky and fast. "Aunt Inez, thank God you answered. I'm in total shit and I don't know what to do." And there was such desperation in those words that I immediately saw him behind the bar of Riverside Bistro, where he'd put all his energy after the divorce, where, at 35, he'd tried to keep the place afloat by borrowing money from me, which he invariably paid back $20 a pop. He explained briefly that Chef Nolan had called in sick 20 minutes ago, projectile vomiting, high fever, a complete nightmare, and that he had a wedding tonight at Ford for 80 people, a full dinner. The guests were already at the church, and if he canceled, the deposit alone would bankrupt him, not to mention the possible lawsuits, and I imagined him pacing behind the counter, running his hand through his dark hair the way he used to do as a kid when something broke and he tried to fix it when no one was looking. "What about your Chef Sue?" I asked, and he replied that I had broken my wrist yesterday, that he had 2 cooks who could barely keep up with the appetizers, and the hall was full, and in 3 hours people were expecting spare ribs and salmon, and his voice finally broke. "I'll have to cancel the order. The deposit alone will ruin me." And in the car, where I had containers of food from the same night's preparation lying in the trunk, all this irony suddenly seemed inappropriate and cruel to me. I asked what the menu was, and upon hearing the description, ribs in a red wine reduction, salmon in an herb crust, roasted vegetables, duchesse potatoes, mixed greens with champagne vinegar, and a chocolate raspberry tart, I instantly mentally compared the supplies, figured that the lamb could be seasoned and chopped differently, that the roast vegetables would work, the potatoes could be used differently, that there would be enough chocolate mousse for the tart bases, and that the raspberries were 20 minutes from the store. And I said firmly, "I'm 15 minutes away. Start preheating the ovens." Because I couldn't bear to see the young man who'd spent his whole life trying to build his business lose it because of a lack of food. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Gaston whispered, "What happened next?" "Tell me later. Right now, we need to save the wedding." And I hung up, pulled out onto the road, my fingers gripping the steering wheel differently for the first time in hours. Not from panic, but with a sense of the right step. And in the rearview mirror, the lights of Raphael's house were getting smaller and smaller. But I didn't feel the usual pang of regret. Instead, a long-forgotten sense of usefulness stirred within me. Riverside Bistro sat on the banks of Miller Creek in a converted Victorian with windows that caught the evening light in amber reflections. Gaston was waiting for me in the parking lot wearing a waiter's vest after his shift, pale, but his eyes lit up as I unloaded the containers. "My God, Aunt Inez, how much food did you make?" he whispered, and I handed him the pan of lamb. "This could be your prime rib if it's cut right and reduced in wine." He smiled, picked up the boxes, and together we carried them into his small but well-appointed kitchen. I demanded to see the china, the arrangements, showed them how to arrange the presentation, and for the next 3 hours it was as if I had returned to the domain I had once commanded. I assigned tasks, raised my head with the withered hand of a general, and led 2 young cooks, giving roasted vegetables a deliberate elegance, arranging the lamb in delicate petals, seasoning the sauce to a shine, and the chocolate mousse, in a tart base and with raspberries that Gaston had sent for, suddenly reminded me what it was like to be needed and important, when someone else's family's bread depended on your decisions. And the cooks, so young that I wanted to burn their shoulders, looked at me with awe and asked, "Where did you learn this?" And I, adjusting the corner of a sprig of dill, quietly replied, 50 years of practice." And when the clock pointed to evening, the first plates were served at 7:30, right on schedule. Through the kitchen window, I watched the dining room gradually fill with people, their faces beaming, their dresses shimmering with fabric and color, and I couldn't help but hold my breath at how natural it all looked. A wedding like something out of an old movie, laughter, the clinking of glasses, toasts, the bride shining in white lace, and the groom, whose smile seemed capable of lighting up the room, and all around, families intertwined in hugs and joy that reminded me why we gather around long tables and raise glasses in the first place. I watched as waiters scurried back and forth carrying dishes, and one of them, returning for more plates, whispered that the beef ribs had been a huge hit, that Table 6 was asking about the chef's name. Then Gaston appeared in the doorway, and the look of panic that had frozen on his face hours earlier was replaced by a new light I hadn't seen since he was a boy, proud of every little achievement. "They're very pleased," he said quietly, and I noticed his shoulders straighten, his voice confident for the first time that evening. "The Ford family asked me to thank the chef in person. Mrs. Ford claims this is the best wedding dinner she's ever had," he added, and I felt my eyes water treacherously, and I blinked, wondering when was the last time someone thanked me to my face? When was the last time my name was mentioned, not in reproach, but in recognition? And, trying to defend myself, I said it was just recycled leftovers, but I could hear how false that sounded. "Bullshit," Gaston snapped, coming closer, lowering his voice so that it seemed to become part of my inner whisper. "This is restaurant-quality food, Aunt Inez, better than restaurant quality, and you made it in 3 hours with someone else's equipment." He paused, then asked cautiously, "What the hell happened at Raphael's party?" And as we were arranging the desserts, I began to tell them about the day at the stove, the dismissive comments, the constant expectation that I would do everything without further ado, the final straw when my food was written off as dog food. Gaston's face darkened with every detail, and finally he said, "It's terrible. You're one of the best cooks I know, and they treat you like a hired hand." "I am a hired hand," I countered wearily, "unpaid." "No." His voice was firm, as if he were surprised by his own resolve. "You're family. And family doesn't do that." The last plates were cleared at 9:15. The wedding party thundered with toasts and laughter, and compliments continued to roll into the kitchen like a warm wave. Then Mrs. Ford herself returned, an elegant woman in her 60s, with silver hair and laughter lines, took my hands in hers and said, "You saved our daughter's wedding. Gaston told me how you intervened at the last minute. I don't know how to thank you." I simply nodded and said that it was enough for me, that everything had turned out well, but she shook her head, looking directly at me. "No, it's not just that. This food is exceptional. Where did you learn?" I chuckled and replied, "Nowhere. Only practice." She studied my face for a long time, with the intent attention of someone accustomed to seeing the essence, and finally said, "You need to run the kitchen yourself. Your talent cannot be hidden." After she left, I helped Gaston clean up, and working in his kitchen flowed so naturally, as if this had been my destiny all along. As we loaded the last load of dishes, he said, "I want to pay you." "Don't be silly, we're family," I dismissed. "Raphael and Albina are family too, but they take advantage of it shamelessly," he replied, pulling an envelope from the register. "Mrs. Ford left this for you, a tip for the chef. Inside were $500 bills and a business card. Wanda Ford, Events Coordinator, Ford Family Foundation." On the back, handwritten, was a note. "Call me. We need someone like you." I looked at the card, at my name written in elegant handwriting, and my heart sank. For the first time in a long time, someone recognized the worth of my work. "Do you understand what this means?" Gaston asked, peering over my shoulder. I understood. It was recognition. It was an opportunity. This meant that maybe, at 65, I wasn't obligated to spend the rest of my life abjectly begging for crumbs of respect from people who had forgotten I was worth more than their unpaid, obliging cook. My phone vibrated again. 3 missed calls from Raphael, 2 from Albina, and a long string of messages that started out conciliatory but grew increasingly irritated. I read the last one from Albina through clenched teeth. "Your dramatic exit ruined the party." The least you could have done was answer the phone. I turned off the phone and put the business card in my purse. "Need a ride?" Gaston asked. "Actually, I think I'll walk," I replied, glancing around the kitchen again. "I need to think." I hadn't called Wanda Ford for 3 days. Not because I didn't want to. The business card burned in my wallet like a lottery ticket I was afraid to erase. But because I had to understand who I was now. The old Inez, who would apologize to her son and daughter-in-law and return to cooking for their own convenience, or the new one, who for the first time could have meaning of her own. Those 3 days were filled with silence from Raphael's house. There were no calls asking for groceries, no errands to pick up my sister Albina's children, no condescending assumptions that I could handle everything myself. The silence could have sounded like loneliness, but for me, it felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in years. On the second morning, I went to the farmer's market where I hadn't ventured for months. Usually, my purchases were utilitarian, what Raphael's family needed, what fit into their budget after I'd already contributed my own money to their expenses. But now I was walking among the stalls, choosing what I personally liked, and this simple act turned out to be a revolution. "Inez." A woman's voice cut through the air, causing me to tear myself away from the tomato stand, where I was admiring the neat rows of scarlet fruit, scented with sun and dust. Lucia Marino, Fonz's former secretary from the insurance company, stood before me, and I suddenly realized I hadn't seen her since that funeral, when the whole world seemed shrouded in gray fog. "Lucia, how are you?" I asked, trying to smile. "Better than you look, my dear," she replied, and her gaze, direct and penetrating, seemed to immediately penetrate deep within me, to where I carefully hid my weary secrets. "What happened?" she asked bluntly, and for a moment I almost did what I'd been doing for decades, remain silent, brush her off, deflect the conversation. But instead, I suddenly started talking about Saturday night, about the cooking that turned into humiliation, about my decision to leave, about Gaston's restaurant and Wanda Ford's business card, which was burning in my purse like a ticket to another life. Lucia listened silently without interrupting, merely nodding at the appropriate moments, and I saw her face darken as I described Raphael's casual cruelty. "This guy needs to face reality," she finally said, her lips pressed together. "Fonse would be furious." I looked down. "Fonse isn't here." "No," she said firmly, "but you are, and you're worth so much more than they let on." She grabbed my hand and her grip was surprisingly strong. "Call that woman today." "Lucia, I don't know if I can do it," I muttered. "Can't do what?" "Be a chef? Sweetie, I've been eating your food at every office party for 15 years. You made even our pathetic office Christmas dinner an event people looked forward to." Her fingers tightened even more. "What are you afraid of?" I looked at the tomatoes, so red, so expensive, and asked myself, what exactly am I afraid of? Failure, or conversely, success, and acknowledge how many years I'd wasted, content to be a comfortable cook. I was 65. "So Eugenia Woods published her first cookbook at 50, Lucia said. "You have time to create something important." That same day, I called Wanda Ford. "Inez, I was hoping to hear from you." Her voice was warm and enveloping, like a blanket. "When can you meet?" "I have a proposition." We agreed to meet on Thursday at a coffee shop downtown, one of those renovated warehouses with exposed brick and long tables where young people sat with laptops and pretended to build the future. Wanda arrived on time, wearing a perfectly tailored blazer, with the confidence of someone used to holding the fates of others in their hands. "I was thinking about Saturday night," she said, settling herself in across from me, "about how you handled the crisis, the quality of the food, your leadership. I need someone like you." She spread papers on the small table, menus, photos of past events, financial projections that made my head spin. The Ford Foundation hosts 12 major events a year: galas, charity dinners, corporate receptions. We've been working with the same catering company for 5 years, but they've become complacent, expensive, and frankly, forgettable. I looked at the photographs: halls with crystal chandeliers, tables adorned with silver, men in tuxedos, women in floor-length dresses. I'd only seen such scenes in magazines. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "Let's start small." A trial dinner. "Next Friday is a donor event, 40 people in total. If you can handle it, we'll discuss a permanent partnership." My palms were sweating. 40 donors accustomed to perfection, people for whom a mistake could cost their reputation. "I don't have a catering license insurance," I began. "Gaston offered you the use of the Riverside kitchen and license for the first few days," Wanda interrupted calmly. "And as for the rest..." She handed me the check. "Consider it a signing bonus. Buy everything you need." I took the paper in my hand. $5,000, more than I'd held since Fonse's death. "Wanda, I can't," I whispered. "You can. And you will." Because Saturday showed not chance, but skill. A few days later, I went home, and the check and business card were in my purse, like 2 tickets to a new life. $5,000, real work, respect, recognition, at 65. I was offered the chance to stop being just Raphael's mother and become someone else. But the front door was unlocked. I walked in and heard voices. Raphael and Albina were sitting on Fonse's old sofa as if it belonged to them, which technically it did. The house had been registered in Raphael's name after Raymond's death for tax reasons, and I had agreed then. "That's it," Albina said, her voice tense. "We called." "My phone was turned off for 3 days," I replied calmly. Raphael stood up, and I saw a flicker of tension in his eyes. Well, at least let him bother me for once. "Mom, we need to talk." "I'm listening." Albina glanced at him briefly, then switched on her usual smile, the one she always did when she needed something. We were thinking about Saturday night and realized there had been some kind of misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. As if I'd misheard the words about dog food, as if I'd misinterpreted the laughter. Raphael didn't mean anything by it, she continued. You know how he gets after wine. It makes him feel terrible. I looked at my son, waiting for him to speak. He fidgeted, his hands in his pockets like a teenager caught in a lie. I'm sorry, Mom. It all went wrong. The food was great. Everyone loved it. I was just kidding. 24 hours of work, $800 spent, and it all turned out to be a joke. I see, I said quietly. Albina had regained the upper hand. So we were thinking, maybe we could have Sunday dinner this week. Let's make up for it. I'll invite Mom and Dad, and we'll make it a real family event. Of course, the Sunday dinner I was supposed to cook in the kitchen with my own ingredients, with Albina invariably playing hostess and taking all the credit, flashed before my mind's eye like an old familiar scene. But now I didn't want to play along, because Wanda's receipt was still in my purse, reminding me that I had a choice, and this time I decided to act differently. The old pattern seemed to be reasserting itself, as if Saturday evening had never happened, and in response to the suggested Sunday, I simply said, I'm busy. And again, when they asked again, I repeated firmly, busy. And at that moment, when confusion flashed in Albina's eyes and Raphael raised an eyebrow, I briefly considered lying, inventing an easy truth, a doctor's appointment, the need to buy something. But the 5,000 ruble check burned in my purse like a promise, and I was tired of being the one who diminished herself for the sake of other people's expectations. Working. Albina chuckled, and her laughter was laced with contempt. Mom, you're retired. As if the words retirement were a death sentence. I didn't argue. I told them about Gaston's restaurant, about the night I saved the wedding, about Wanda Ford's proposals, and as I spoke, their faces changed expressions, from disbelief to panic, and in the end, Albina, habitually choosing a defensive position, declared that it was crazy to start at 65, that I had no real professional experience, that I should be afraid of failure. But I answered simply, if I fail, then at least I will fail doing something important for myself. And these words sounded freely in my throat, like the first breath of air after a long silence. Raphael tried to counter with the usual excuses. Mom, we don't need it. We'll take care of you. And his voice carried the same unconscious confidence that allowed him to live by other people's decisions. But I looked at him calmly and said, You're making sure I'm comfortable being your cook, but that's not the same as respecting my value. A silence fell between us, heavy with years of unspoken grievances, after which Albina stood up, snapping angrily. If you want to be seen as ridiculous while chasing your dream career, that's your choice, but don't expect us to pick up the pieces. And they left, Albina's heels echoing across my wooden floor like a metronome, counting down the minute I finally pulled out Wanda's check and realized it wasn't revenge or a whim, but a choice. The next morning, I went to the bank, deposited a check, and then went shopping for clothes that would suggest a chef, not a doting mother. And when on Sunday, instead of the planned family dinner, I was making lists for the Ford Foundation's appreciation dinner, my future stretched out across the table in the form of neatly arranged menu items, purchases, and timelines. On Friday, I walked through the marble lobby of the Riverside Country Club in white chef's clothes that fit me like a new role, and every oil painting in the hallway seemed to me now not an unattainable narrative, but a backdrop for my work. The kitchen was vast and intimidating, awash in gleaming metal and warm steam. But as soon as I began chopping shallots and reducing wine, a familiar rhythm took over. Hands honed by years knew where to stop and where to speed up. And 2 hours before the start, Wanda introduced me to the team. Chef Inez, she said, and the name rang in my ears like a confession, causing a slight tremor that I carefully concealed. Chef Sue, looking over my list, looked up and asked calmly, "Would you like us to begin carving the ducks?" He spoke with professional precision, and the address, Chef Inez, sent a thrill through me that I carefully kept hidden from my face. I nodded, feeling every cell in my body confirming his choice, and replied quietly but confidently, "Please, and let's get to the main course." Sue nodded back, directing the team, his voice echoing, "We'll finish all of this in a minute during service." The next 2 hours passed in a thick fog of controlled chaos. Noise, steam, the clanking of metal, quick footsteps, and the coordinated movements of hands merged into one stream. And as I gave orders, I suddenly found my voice sounding authoritative and firm, as if it belonged not to me but to the woman I had just met for the first time within myself. The kitchen obeyed me like an orchestra to an attentive conductor, something I'd never been before, but always, it turned out, could be. "Duck, medium rare, table 7, I called out, deftly arranging the pink pieces of meat with the precision fawns once reserved for filling out insurance forms. The cherry gastry gleamed in the light, shimmering like liquid rubies in a bowl. Through the serving window, I caught a glimpse of the dining room. Crystal chandeliers, snow-white tablecloths, women in elegant dresses, and men in formal tuxedos. And I clearly understood. These people had come here of their own free will. They had chosen to be here. They had chosen to eat what I had prepared, and they had chosen to support a cause important to them. The contrast with Raphael's anniversary was striking. There, I had been invisible, a nameless assistant, but here, I was the reason for the evening's success. "Chef!" I heard the waiter's voice behind me, and he, slightly out of breath, stopped in the aisle. "The man at table 3 would like to speak with you." My stomach clenched painfully because in my limited experience, customers wanting to see the chef usually came with complaints. But Wanda appeared next to me, smiling so warmly that I felt reassured. "Inez, come on, I want to introduce you." The man at table 3 turned out to be about 70, with silvery hair and that special, effortless confidence you only find in people accustomed to living in a world of old wealth. He stood up as we approached and extended his hand. "Marino Maddo," he introduced himself, adding, "I must thank you personally." That duck was superb. Restaurant quality doesn't even begin to do it justice. "Thank you." I nodded, feeling my cheeks heat up, but he continued, "Next month I'm hosting a charity dinner for a children's hospital, 200 guests. Would you be interested?" 200 guests. My hands began to tremble, and I clasped them behind my back, trying to hide my excitement. "That's quite a lot," I whispered, but Marino smiled softly. "I've been to dozens of similar events, and believe me, you have real talent. We'll provide you with a full team, you'll have creative freedom, and a decent salary." After he left, Vanda and I sat in the half-empty room while the staff cleared away the remains of the evening. Every returned plate was spotless. Every guest's review was sincere. And for the first time, I felt like I'd achieved what I'd always sought in cooking, recognition that didn't have to be begged for. "So, how do you like Marino's proposal?" Vanda asked, and I admitted openly, "To be honest, I'm terrified to think about it." 200 people, beyond anything I've ever done. She looked at me directly, pouring the rest of the expensive wine into her glass. "But it's not beyond your capabilities." Tonight is proof. In 15 years of working with renowned chefs, graduates of prestigious schools, winners of stars and awards, I've rarely seen such a team and such food. You have something many lack. I took a slow sip, tasting a richness of flavor I'd never noticed before, and quietly admitted, "I keep waiting for someone to realize I have no idea what I'm doing." Wanda smiled. "Nobody starts out confident. The only thing that matters is whether you let that fear stop you." She leaned closer. "I have a proposition." The foundation needs a permanent chef for all events, a guaranteed income, professional development, and ultimately, their own kitchen. Are you interested? At that moment, my phone vibrated. A message from Raphael. Mom, we need to talk. Albina is pregnant. I stared at the screen, instantly understanding the subtext. They needed free labor again, a free nanny, a free cook, all under the guise of family duty. The old me would have rushed over to them, offering apologies and justifications. But now I turned the phone face down and said to Wanda, yes, I'm very interested. On the way home, I passed their house. The lights were on, the cars were parked in the driveway, and I could almost see them discussing how to use the news of the baby to tie me back to them. But I didn't stop. I turned into the small apartment complex, the same one Fonz and I had once considered out of reach, and walked along its quiet alleys, imagining a kitchen where no one would call my food dog food, and a living room where I could sit without feeling out of place. That morning, Albina called, her voice full of forced enthusiasm. Inez, thank goodness you answered. We have news. I calmly congratulated her and immediately followed. We thought we might need some help. You understand? The baby, Raphael's job, my nausea. We hope you want to be a part of the baby's life. I took a deep breath and replied, I'll be a grandma like everyone else. Birthdays, holidays, and I'll help out sometimes when I have time. When will you have time? Her voice took on a steely edge. We're talking about your grandson. He's your child, your responsibility. But I already knew. They wanted me to be needed, not appreciated. I'm needed, but not by you, I said, hanging up before she could continue, and almost immediately dialed the leasing office. The apartment was still listed as vacant, and the thought of being able to move in as early as next month warmed me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. That same day, I went to the country club to pick up the check for last night's dinner. When I unfolded the paper and saw the numbers, I had to blink twice, as if I couldn't believe my eyes. The amount was more than I earned in 3 months of Social Security. Real money for real work. Compensation that reflected my skill, not the impersonal family obligations I'd spent so many years pursuing. As I walked to the car, I spotted a familiar figure by the tennis courts. Raphael in his workout clothes, racket in hand, confident and relaxed, like a man for whom everything around him was a familiar scene. He'd probably been coming here to the club for years, unaware that this was a luxury he'd inherited. Paid memberships, tables, tournaments. For him, it was the norm, part of the air he'd breathed since childhood. He spotted me before I could turn away. Mom? His voice sounded like he'd seen a ghost. He ran closer, confusion etched on his face. What are you doing here? Working. Working. Here? I replied calmly. I catered the Ford Foundation dinner last night. He opened his mouth, then closed it, and at that moment, everything around us was going on as usual. Men were discussing stock portfolios, women were adjusting their dresses after a game of golf, and no one was paying attention to the minor drama by the tennis court. Did you cook here? He asked, as if checking to see if he'd heard correctly. 40 guests, duck with cherry sauce, mushroom risotto, chocolate dessert. I listed calmly, and I saw realization flicker in his eyes, slow as the rising sun. Everything went very well. He exhaled. Mom, I had no idea you... He hesitated, as if afraid to finish the sentence. Albina said you hung up this morning, and we thought that you were wrong. I opened the car door, not wanting to delve into the conversation. I have to go. I have a meeting with another client. I said the words so easily, as if they'd always been a part of my life, but there was a tremor in his voice. A familiar note from when he was a teenager and his voice would crack. Another client? He stepped closer. Mom, wait. Can we talk? I looked at him, a grown man standing on the country club court, and realized the line between our lives was now clearly drawn. We can talk, I said, but not today. Today, I have work. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen. Not the one I shared with Fonz's ghost and my son's expectations, but the spacious converted warehouse that housed Inez's table, my catering company. Sunlight streamed through the huge industrial windows, reflecting off the gleaming stainless steel countertops and polished cutlery, now emblazoned with my name. Raising money for the Children's Hospital opened new doors for me. 3 major events followed: corporate contracts, wedding receptions, and now I had a waiting list filled until next spring. Wanda was right. Even she didn't expect word of me to spread so quickly among people for whom food wasn't just sustenance, but a part of life, a way to preserve memories. Chef Inez, Anna, my chef Sue, the same girl who had once worked the line at Gaston's that desperate evening, appeared at the door. Wedding preparations are complete. Ingredients for the foundation dinner have been ordered. I nodded, experiencing that strange feeling when my staff, people who looked at me with respect, waited for my instructions, called me chef, not out of politeness but sincerely, still seemed part of someone else's life. Thank you. What time is the anniversary tasting? I asked. 2:00. Gail Hart specifically requested that you handle it. I smiled. Gail Hart, the woman whose golden celebration was to gather 200 guests in a ballroom I had once only dreamed of. Now I was creating those memories, giving a taste of celebration to those who knew how to appreciate the effort. The irony of fate didn't escape me. For 37 years of marriage, I'd cooked for other people's business meetings, for my husband's successes, for my son's holidays, where my work faded into the background. Now strangers were paying for the same dishes, and paying generously because they knew the value of my work. My phone vibrated. A message from Lucia. Saw the article in the Tribune. Proud of you. I opened the link and saw a photo. Me in a white chef's uniform, confident standing among pots and pans, as if I'd been there all my life. The journalist wrote about my journey, about how I'd made a name for myself without diplomas or stars, through word of mouth and consistently high quality. She didn't write about the price, about the family dinners I no longer cooked, about the grandson I saw only occasionally, about the son who still called, but cautiously, as if he was learning to speak to me all over again. And then another message, this time from Raphael. Can we talk, please? For 6 months straight, he'd written similar requests, devoid of the previous demands and manipulations, and I almost always ignored them. But today was different. The article made my new life official, public, beyond doubt. I called back. Mom? His voice sounded genuinely surprised, as if he'd given up waiting. Thank you for answering. What do you need, Raphael? I asked. Can I see you at your restaurant? At the restaurant? I repeated, catching the change in his words. It's not a restaurant. It's a catering service. Your catering service? Can I come? An hour later, he stood in my kitchen, in his office suit, too smart for the space where knives clattered, pots boiled, and plates clanged. He looked around as if he were on an alien planet. That's impressive, he said, watching Anna meticulously chop vegetables for lunch. I had no idea it was so professional. What did you think? I asked Raphael, keeping my voice low, but letting the firmness I'd learned over the months shine through. I don't know, he admitted, lowering his eyes like a boy caught in the act. Maybe something like a church kitchen or, well, selling food to the neighbors. His gesture was helpless. He gestured toward the refrigeration unit, the industrial stoves, the system of plans and schedules that ensured the smooth running of 3 events at once. Not that, I said calmly. This is a real business with employees, expenses, and profits. Something that can't be ignored or belittled, turning it into grandma's hobby. I read an article in the Tribune, he finally said. It said you're fully booked from spring to summer next year. I smiled slightly. Actually, we just got the Alfie Foundation's annual gala. 800 guests. The number hung in the air, like a tuning fork, setting a new note for our relationship. I could see him trying to comprehend the scale he'd once thought impossible for me. Mom, his voice wavered. I owe you an apology. You owe me more than just that, I replied. I know, you're right. I've been thinking about that night, about what I said, and not just that night, for years. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The words I'd been waiting for 6 months rang out weaker than I imagined. It's easy to apologize, harder to change. Thank you, I replied without any undue emotion. Albina is struggling with a lot, too. She's having a hard time adjusting to the idea that I'm no longer simply free and always available. His words rang out again with a hint of the old tone, as if my purpose was still to be endlessly useful. I'm only available for what I choose to be available for, I said. I know, he nodded. I understand that now. He glanced around the kitchen again, as if confirming this was reality and not a dream. The baby's due in March, he said more quietly. We were hoping that you would be a part of his life. I intend to be a grandmother, I replied, but that doesn't mean being an unpaid babysitter. It means birthdays and Christmas mornings. It means watching the kids when I'm free and when I want to be. It means being there when they grow up and want advice. It means being family, but not serving. Raphael nodded slowly, and I saw understanding break through the usual expectations. And us? He asked. What does this mean for us? That's up to you. What do you mean? Do you want a relationship with me as a woman and a mother, or are you simply looking for someone to offload what you don't want to deal with? The question hung between the cutting tables and hot stoves, amid the smell of sauce and fresh herbs, in the space where I had learned to value my work. He stared at the floor, struggling with himself. Finally, he looked up. I need a relationship with you. I want to know who you are when you don't care about anyone else. Then we'll build it, I said. He stayed for another hour, watching me manage the kitchen, discuss the menu with Anna, check the reports. He asked questions, not superficial ones, but real, sincere ones. As he left, he hugged me, not formally, but the way you hug someone you're afraid of losing forever. That evening, I sat in my new apartment with windows overlooking the park, where every single thing was mine, without regard for anyone else's tastes or rules. On the walls hung customer reviews, photos from banquets, a license with the words, Inez's Table, in stern, official font. The phone rang. Albina's name appeared on the screen. Inez. Her voice was softer than before. I saw the article. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied. I wanted to apologize, she continued, choosing her words carefully, for taking you for granted, for not seeing you. Didn't see me, I repeated quietly. They were the most honest words she had ever spoken. Thank you. The baby is moving already, she said after a pause. Would you ever like to feel that? It wasn't a demand, but a timid request, like an extended olive branch. I'd like that, I replied. Perhaps you could come over for dinner. I'll cook, she added, and those words surprised me most of all. Albina had offered to cook for me. The world tilted slightly. I'd prefer if you came here, I said. I'll cook. A pause. Then I'd like that too, she agreed. Hanging up, I poured a glass of wine, the very same one I could now afford without looking back, and went to the window. Couples strolled downstairs. Children played on swings under the watchful eye of their grandparents. Somewhere in the city, families were sitting at tables, some at their own, some in restaurants where chefs like me meticulously crafted every detail. I remembered the woman in the purple dress standing in my son's kitchen 6 months ago, invisible, rejected, watching her labor being appropriated by others. Now she seemed like someone I'd long outgrown, like a dress that no longer fits. My phone vibrated again. A new client. A Fortune 500 company was asking to discuss their annual shareholders' dinner. 500 guests, an unlimited budget, complete creative control. I smiled and began composing a reply. The sun was setting outside, painting the city in a golden light, and I knew people would try my food, remember my menu, recognize my name. The last feast, where I had once been invisible, turned out to be just the first course in the feast of my own life, which was now completely mine. The old Inez would have asked herself, Do I deserve this success? But the one looking out over the city with a glass of wine knew the answer without a doubt. I deserved everything I had built and everything that was yet to come. Revenge turned out to be not destruction, but creation, not cruelty, but dignity. I took nothing from them, but took everything for myself. And it was amazing. Now tell me, what would you do in my place? Write in the comments. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to watch the video right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.